Picture a grand building sitting on a rocky point where land meets the Pacific Ocean. Wind hits the cliffs. Waves explode into white foam. Salt hangs in the air. Inside there are bright lights, mirrors, dancing, and the sound of glasses clinking. Outside, it's all rock, fog, and ocean. This is the Cliff House of San Francisco, beautiful, dangerous, and never fully safe. People have watched this place rise and fall more than once. Fires took it. An explosion shook it. A storm beat it. Money troubles closed it. Each time, people tried again. They rebuilt. They promised it would last. And each time, the ocean and time pushed back. Next door once stood the giant dream of Adolph Sutro. Huge glass and steel bathhouses where families swam beneath a roof that looked like a crystal greenhouse. Those are ruins now. Concrete pools open to the sky, water, and sea wind. The Cliff House has been many buildings with many owners, and the city around it has changed again and again. Yet, people keep asking the same questions. What happened here? Was this all just bad luck? Or was it a fight no one could win? If you like deep dives into Gilded Age buildings and the people behind them, this is your story. High above the roaring waters of the Pacific Ocean, on cliffs that seem to defy gravity itself, once stood a place that felt more like a fantasy than a building. Perched on the very edge of the American continent, the Cliff House gazed endlessly into the horizon. It wasn't just another restaurant. It was a witness to San Francisco's wild heart, its disasters, and its incredible rebirths. The early days of San Francisco. In 1863, San Francisco was still shaking off the dust of the gold rush. The city's streets were crowded with dreamers, gamblers, and fortune seekers chasing glimmers of gold. But if you wandered far enough west, away from the noise of the city, you'd reach a very different world. The edge of civilization itself. The cliffs above Ocean Beach were cold, windy, and mostly empty. Fog rolled in like ghostly waves, swallowing everything in white. Most people saw this land as useless, too wild, too windy, too far from downtown. But two men, Senator John Buckley and C.C. Butler, saw something else entirely. To them, these cliffs weren't desolate. They were magical. They dreamed of building a retreat, a place where ordinary people could breathe clean sea air and feel like kings for a day. Building the first Cliff House. Their vision took shape as a modest wooden structure on top of the cliffs, small, simple, yet full of charm. There were no paved roads or railways leading to it. The only way to get there was by horse, carriage, or foot, crossing miles of sand dunes. The journey itself became part of the adventure. Inside, the Cliff House was cozy and bright, with large windows that opened toward the sea. Guests could dine while watching waves crash against the rocks far below. Hunters, picnickers, and horseback riders came for the thrill, the sound of the ocean, the salty air, and the freedom of being on the edge of the world. In those early years, the Cliff House was more than a restaurant. It was a symbol of hope. It showed that beauty could exist even in the roughest corners of a booming city. Both wealthy businessmen and simple workers came to enjoy the same sunset, standing shoulder to shoulder at the railing, united by wonder. The growing city. By the 1870s, San Francisco was transforming from a gold rush outpost into a true American metropolis. Mansions rose on the hills, gas lamps lit the streets, and cable cars began their climb through the fog. Yet, even as progress spread, the Cliff House remained a peaceful escape, a reminder that beyond the city's rush, nature still ruled. But by the early 1880s, time began to wear down the little seaside restaurant. Its walls creaked under the wind, its paint peeled from the salty air. Fewer people made the long trip out to the ocean, and the once lively place started to fade. It needed a new dreamer, someone bold enough to give it life again. The vision of Adolph Sutro, 1883-1896, a man of imagination. Born in Germany, Sutro had immigrated to America with little more than ambition. He became an engineer, a thinker, and eventually a millionaire, but not through luck. In the silver mines of Nevada, miners often died from toxic air and flooding tunnels. Sutro designed the Sutro Tunnel, a massive underground passage that drained water and brought fresh air to the mines. It saved lives and made him rich beyond imagination. Yet Adolph Sutro wasn't satisfied with wealth. He believed the city should belong to everyone, not just the elite. He wanted ordinary citizens to have access to art, nature, and fresh air. To him, the Cliff House wasn't just a business, it was a public treasure waiting to shine again. A symbol for the people. When Sutro bought the Cliff House, he didn't immediately change it. Instead, he let it run quietly under the management of J.M. Wilkins, observing what made it special. But fate soon intervened. The vision of Adolph Sutro and the rise of the Gingerbread Palace, 1883 to 1896. By the early 1880s, the Cliff House had become tired and weather-worn. The ocean winds had eaten away its wooden frame, and the laughter that once filled its rooms had faded into memories. Yet, where others saw decay, Adolph Sutro saw opportunity and destiny. Adolph Sutro, the dreamer who loved San Francisco. Sutro wasn't just a businessman, he was a visionary who believed that a great city should also have great places for its people. After becoming one of the richest men in the West, he used his fortune to build public parks, libraries, and gardens. He wanted San Franciscans, rich or poor, to experience joy, beauty, and learning. When he looked at the Cliff House, perched above the crashing Pacific, he didn't see a failing restaurant. He saw a symbol, a bridge between nature and civilization, between ordinary people and the vastness of the ocean. He bought the property in 1883, not to turn a profit, but to preserve a piece of magic. The sea, he often said, belongs to everyone. For several years, he let J.M. Wilkins continue managing the business. The Cliff House quietly served visitors again, but Sutro had larger plans forming in his mind, plans that would one day change the San Francisco coastline forever. The explosion of 1887, fire and fury. On the calm morning of January the 16th, 1887, the fog that usually hugged the cliffs had just begun to clear. Fishermen out at sea could see the coastline again. But farther offshore, a small ship called the Parallel was in trouble. The schooner carried dynamite powder and oil lamps, a dangerous combination even in calm weather. No one could have imagined the disaster about to unfold. Without warning, an explosion tore through the air, a deafening roar that shook the ground like an earthquake. The blast was so powerful that windows shattered all across San Francisco. Some claimed they heard it as far away as Oakland. At the Cliff House, the north wing was ripped apart. Walls collapsed, furniture splintered, and glass rained down like ice. Miraculously, no one inside was killed, but the building was left in ruins. When Adolph Sutro arrived to inspect the damage, witnesses said he walked calmly among the debris. He didn't curse or shout. He simply examined the wreckage and said quietly, "We will rebuild." And rebuild he did. Within months, the Cliff House reopened, repaired, repainted, and ready once again to greet visitors. But Sutro knew this was only the beginning. The explosion had taught him that the sea could destroy anything made by human hands. If he wanted to create something lasting, it had to be stronger and grander than anything built before. The fire of 1894, a night of flames. For 7 years after the explosion, the Cliff House stood proudly on the cliffs. By the 1890s, it was once again filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of piano music. Couples came to watch sunsets, families celebrated birthdays, and travelers from around the world stopped to see the Pacific crashing below. But on Christmas night in 1894, tragedy struck again. A small flame, maybe from a kitchen stove, maybe from a faulty chimney flue, sparked deep inside the wooden walls. The fire spread faster than anyone could react. Within minutes, flames were roaring through the roof. Outside, people gathered helplessly on the cliffs, watching their beloved landmark burn. The night sky glowed red, and the ocean reflected the fire's angry light. By dawn, nothing was left but a smoking skeleton of beams. The Cliff House, which had survived explosions and storms, was gone. San Franciscans mourned the loss as if they had lost a friend. Newspapers wrote about the tragedy for weeks, but while most saw an ending, Adolph Sutro saw a challenge. He refused to let the Cliff House fade into memory. He would build something so breathtaking that the world would never forget it. The Gingerbread Palace, 1896. 2 years later, in 1896, A new structure rose from the ashes, and it was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Standing 7 stories tall, the new cliff house looked like a castle from a fairy tale. With its spires, turrets, and wooden balconies, it resembled a palace that had somehow drifted across the Atlantic from Europe to California's wild edge. People nicknamed it the Gingerbread Palace because of its elaborate decoration, delicate carvings, curving arches, and a roofline that looked almost sweet enough to eat. Inside, it was just as magical. Grand staircases swept upward toward stained glass windows that caught the sunlight. Fine dining rooms offered ocean views that seemed to stretch forever. Chandeliers sparkled above tables where guests enjoyed oysters, champagne, and laughter, while waves crashed far below. For Adolph Sutro, the new cliff house was more than a building. It was a gift to his city, a place where everyone could feel wonder. From miles away, ships sailing into San Francisco Bay could see its shining white towers. To sailors, it became a sign of home. The Sutro Baths, a temple of the people. Next to the cliff house, Adolph Sutro began an even bolder dream, something far grander than a restaurant or scenic viewpoint. He wanted to build a palace not of marble or gold, but of glass and water. His goal was simple, yet extraordinary: to give ordinary people a chance to experience beauty, leisure, and education, all in one place. When the Sutro Baths opened in 1896, they were unlike anything the world had ever seen. The vast glass-roof building stretched across 3 full acres, making it the largest indoor swimming complex in the world. Its design was a marvel of Victorian engineering, an enormous greenhouse of steel and glass that sparkled in the coastal sunlight. Inside, the air smelled of salt and seaweed. 6 massive pools shimmered with seawater pumped directly from the Pacific Ocean. Valves and tunnels beneath the cliffs allowed thousands of gallons of ocean water to fill the tanks in just an hour. Some pools were heated, others were left ice cold, so visitors could choose their comfort level. There were diving platforms, slides, and bleachers for thousands of spectators. Families watched acrobatic swimmers and high divers perform daring tricks. Elsewhere, people explored rooms filled with artwork, sculptures, and exotic exhibits, stuffed animals from around the world, seashell collections, and curiosities from other continents. For only a few cents, visitors could swim, stroll through galleries, attend concerts, or simply sit by the water and enjoy the view. Sutro's vision was about fairness. He believed that even the city's poorest families deserved access to the same pleasures that the wealthy enjoyed in private clubs. He wanted every child to know the feeling of standing before the ocean, amazed and free. On weekends, steam trains and electric trolleys carried thousands of people to the seaside. The cliffs were alive with music, laughter, and the smell of popcorn. Couples held hands, children splashed in the pools, and sunlight glittered on the glass ceiling above. With the cliff house beside it, the Sutro Baths turned the rugged edge of San Francisco into a world of joy and imagination. Adolph Sutro had done the impossible. He made the farthest edge of America feel like the center of the world. Disaster and rebirth, 1906-1909. The late 1890s had been a golden time for the Cliff House and Adolph Sutro's empire. The Gingerbread Palace glowed proudly above the Pacific, and the nearby Sutro Baths shimmered like a glass cathedral filled with laughter. San Francisco had never seen anything like it, a place where art, nature, and joy came together by the sea. But as history often reminds us, beauty rarely lasts forever. The Great Earthquake of 1906, the day the city shook. At 5:12 a.m. on April 18, 1906, the ground beneath San Francisco began to move. At first, people thought it was just another small tremor, the kind the city sometimes felt. But within seconds, the shaking became violent. Streets cracked open, buildings crumbled, gas lines burst, and fire erupted across the city. Downtown San Francisco became an inferno. Churches, mansions, and entire neighborhoods collapsed into dust. It was one of the most destructive earthquakes in American history. And out on the cliffs, the cliff house stood directly in the line of nature's fury. The ocean boiled with motion. Waves slammed against the rocks below, throwing spray high into the air. Windows shattered, Beams groaned, and chandeliers swung wildly inside the gingerbread palace. When the shaking finally stopped, San Franciscans expected to find their seaside treasure in ruins. But when the fog lifted, there it stood, still upright, its towers and spires cutting through the smoke. The city was stunned. Newspapers called it a miracle. For a brief moment, it seemed that the Cliff House was untouchable, a survivor blessed by fate. But fate wasn't finished yet. The fire of 1907, the final fall of the palace. Just a year later, on the night of September 7th, 1907, another tragedy struck. It began quietly, sometime after midnight. Workers at the Cliff House noticed smoke rising from one of the kitchens. Within minutes, flames were crawling up the walls. The building's dry wooden frame, the same beautiful material that made it look like a fairy tale castle, now became its greatest weakness. The fire spread faster than anyone could fight it. By the time help arrived, the entire palace was glowing orange against the dark sky. From miles away, people could see the towers burning like candles. Waves below turned red with reflection. The air filled with the sound of crackling wood and the roar of flames. By morning, nothing remained but blackened ruins. The gingerbread palace, the most beautiful building on the Pacific coast, was gone. For the second time in history, the Cliff House had burned to the ground. The death of Adolph Sutro and the end of an era. Tragically, Adolph Sutro did not live to see this final disaster. He had died in 1898, 9 years before the fire, leaving behind a city that admired and respected him deeply. His projects, the Sutro Baths, Mount Sutro Forest, and the Cliff House, were monuments to his belief that beauty should belong to everyone. When the gingerbread palace collapsed into ash, it felt as though the last piece of Sutro's dream had vanished. But one person refused to let that dream die: his daughter, Dr. Emma Sutro Merritt. Dr. Emma Merritt, a daughter's promise. Emma Merritt was not like most women of her time. She was highly educated, strong-willed, and determined. As one of California's first female physicians, she had inherited not only her father's intelligence, but also his deep sense of responsibility to the city. When she saw the ruins of the Cliff House, she knew what had to be done. She would rebuild, not as a fantasy castle, but as a lasting symbol of her father's vision. In 1908, Emma Merritt gathered architects, engineers, and builders. She told them that the new Cliff House must be different. Something timeless, something that would never again fall victim to fire or wind. She hired the respected architectural firm, Reed & Reed, known for their solid classical designs. Together, they planned a structure that would combine strength and grace, a true monument by the sea. The neoclassical Cliff House, 1909. 2 years later, in 1909, the new Cliff House stood ready to welcome the public once more. Gone were the turrets and spires of the gingerbread palace. In their place rose a neoclassical masterpiece, a building of white stucco and stone, supported by tall columns and large arched windows that faced the ocean. The new design felt modern, elegant, and eternal. It looked less like a fairy tale and more like a piece of ancient Rome, clean, symmetrical, and proud. Inside, polished marble floors gleamed in the sunlight. Soft golden light filled the dining rooms. From every table, guests could look out across the vast blue Pacific. The restaurant's grand style reflected a new era, an age of dignity and quiet luxury. San Franciscans, still recovering from the earthquake's devastation, found comfort in its beauty. To them, the Cliff House symbolized rebirth. It was proof that their city and their spirit could rise again after even the worst disaster. A place to dine with eternity. By 1914, the Bohemian San Franciscan travel guide described the Cliff House as a place where one may dine with a view of eternity. That phrase captured everything the building stood for. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was an experience. To eat there was to sit between earth and sky, between history and horizon. The endless sound of the waves, the wind through the open windows, and the distant glow of the city lights made visitors feel like time itself had paused. Artists, poets, and writers came to the Cliff House for inspiration. Soldiers and sailors came before leaving for war, hoping to remember that breathtaking view. Families came to celebrate milestones. Lovers came to watch the sunset. The restaurant became a living memory, part of the city's identity, a place that had been burned, rebuilt, and reborn again. A monument of resilience. By the time the 1910s arrived, San Francisco was no longer a rough mining town. It was a confident, rebuilt city entering the modern age. The new Cliff House, standing tall against the Pacific, embodied that spirit perfectly, strong, graceful, and unafraid. The name Sutro remained carved in memory, not just on the cliffs, but in the hearts of those who walked there. His daughter Emma had fulfilled his legacy, transforming tragedy into triumph. As the waves continued to crash below and the gulls circled above, the Cliff House had become more than just a building. It was a story of hope and endurance, proof that beauty could rise again and again, no matter how many times it burned. The golden years and the Playland era, 1920s, 1940s. By the dawn of the 1920s, America was changing fast. The Great War was over, jazz was on the radio, and the country was racing into the future. The Roaring Twenties had arrived, a time of cars, electricity, motion pictures, and endless optimism. In San Francisco, the city was alive again. Streetcars clattered along Market Street, dance halls filled the evenings with music, and the skyline glimmered with new electric lights. Out on the western edge of the city, the Cliff House stood proudly, calm, white, and timeless, watching the waves as it had done for decades. A modern age arrives. The new century brought a new kind of visitor. Gone were the days of horse-drawn wagons and long dune treks. Now, sleek automobiles sped down Point Lobos Avenue, carrying families and couples eager to see the ocean view. The Cliff House became a weekend destination, a place to eat, stroll, and feel the power of the Pacific winds. Inside, the restaurant glowed with polished wood, marble, and warm light. Waiters in crisp uniforms served oysters, roast beef, and champagne to guests dressed in the fashion of the Jazz Age. Large windows framed a living painting, waves crashing below, seagulls spinning in the wind, and the fog creeping over the horizon. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was an experience, an elegant meeting point between city and sea, the changing coastline. While the Cliff House flourished, its grand neighbor, the Sutro Baths, faced new challenges. Built in an age of wonder, the baths had once drawn thousands. Families came to swim, slide, and watch performances in the massive glass building. But by the 1920s, the world had changed. People now had radios, cars, and new kinds of entertainment. Maintaining such a giant structure was expensive, and fewer visitors meant lower profits. Even so, the baths continued to operate, stubbornly holding on to their glory days. The coast around the Cliff House remained busy. Photographers sold postcards, street vendors roasted peanuts, and children raced along the sand at Ocean Beach. The cliffs echoed with life, laughter, and the hum of an age discovering its rhythm. The 1930s, hard times, new dreams. Then came the Great Depression. By the early 1930s, the stock market had crashed, banks had failed, and millions of Americans were struggling to survive. The glamour of the 1920s vanished overnight. In San Francisco, many restaurants closed their doors forever. But the Cliff House, despite declining visitors, refused to fade away. Its walls had already seen so much: earthquakes, fires, and explosions, and it would not surrender to economic hardship. It was during these difficult years that two brothers entered the story, men who would give the Cliff House a brand new chapter of life. The Whitney brothers, George and Leo. George Whitney and Leo Whitney were local entrepreneurs and showmen, known for bringing joy to San Francisco's western edge. They had created a massive amusement park called Playland at the beach, just south of the Cliff House. Playland was a wonderland of rides, games, and laughter. Roller coasters soared over the sand. Cotton candy, hot dogs, and popcorn filled the air with sweet smells. At night, neon lights reflected off the ocean waves, creating a glowing carnival by the sea. In 1937, the Whitney brothers purchased the Cliff House from its private owners. To them, it wasn't just a restaurant. It was the crown jewel of the coast. They wanted it to match the energy and fun of Playland, transforming it from an elegant dining hall into a place that everyone, not just the rich, could enjoy. A new look for a new era. The Whitneys gave the Cliff House a complete makeover. The neoclassical style, with its marble and columns, was replaced by something brighter and more casual. They painted the walls in lighter tones, added booths and bar counters, and brought in live music and dancing. It became a warm, family-friendly destination, still refined but far more accessible. You could come in wearing your best dress or just a jacket full of sand from Ocean Beach, and you'd still feel welcome. Downstairs, they opened Sutro's at the Cliff House, a lively restaurant and bar where big band music played on weekends. On clear days, the dance floor was flooded with sunlight. On foggy nights, the windows glowed golden against the gray mist outside. Families spent the day riding the carousel and roller coaster at Playland, then climbed the hill to enjoy dinner at the Cliff House. It became a ritual for generations. The air was always filled with laughter, the scent of sea salt, and the faint music drifting from the dining room. Playland at the beach, a paradise by the sea. For decades, Playland stood as San Francisco's playground. It stretched across several blocks with attractions that thrilled both children and adults. The Big Dipper roller coaster, the Fun House with its spinning barrels, and the famous Laughing Sal, a mechanical woman whose eerie laugh echoed through the park day and night. Visitors could win prizes, eat taffy, or simply sit on the seawall to watch the sunset. And when hunger struck, the Cliff House was just a short walk away. The connection between Playland and the Cliff House created something special, a community space that combined elegance, nostalgia, and fun. For a generation growing up during hard times, it was a piece of magic they could afford. World War II, hope on the horizon. When the 1940s arrived, the joy of Playland met the uncertainty of war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States entered World War II, and San Francisco became one of the most important military cities in the country. Ships lined the bay, soldiers marched the streets, and the Golden Gate was watched day and night. The Cliff House, sitting high above the waves, became a place of comfort. Soldiers visited before shipping out, eating their last American meal while watching the sunset fade into the Pacific. Some would never return, but for many, the memory of that final evening stayed with them forever. After the war, those who did come home often returned to the same cliffs, this time with wives, children, and parents, to celebrate peace. For them, the Cliff House was no longer just a restaurant. It was a symbol of endurance, love, and survival. A San Francisco treasure. By the end of the 1940s, the Cliff House had become one of San Francisco's best-known landmarks. Photographs of its white walls and ocean views appeared on postcards sent around the world. Couples got all engaged there. Tourists lined up to see it. Generations of locals told stories of their first visit, of foggy nights, glowing lights, and the endless sound of waves below. Even as the world modernized, something about the Cliff House remained timeless. Maybe it was the way the wind howled through its corners, or how the sea never stopped roaring beneath it. It reminded people that beauty and strength could survive, even on the edge of the world. Decline, renewal, and the national park era, 1950s, 1970s. The mid-20th century brought another great wave of change to San Francisco. The world had survived World War II, and now America was entering a new age, one of television, suburbs, and modern life. People were moving away from the crowded cities, chasing quiet neighborhoods, backyards, and cars. But while the nation looked forward, the western edge of San Francisco, where the Cliff House, Playland, and the ruins of the Sutro baths stood, began to look backward. What had once been the city's glittering playground was slowly fading, year by year, into memory. The 1950s, a coastline, losing its spark. By the early 1950s, the Whitney brothers were still running both Playland at the beach and the Cliff House. Families continued to visit on weekends, but the crowds weren't what they used to be. Television had become the new entertainment. Instead of packing into cars for a seaside afternoon, people now stayed home to watch black and white programs flicker on their screens. Amusement parks across the country began closing one by one, and Playland felt the same slow decline. The Cliff House, too, felt the changes. It was no longer the glamorous destination it once had been. Its once elegant dining rooms were showing their age. The wood was worn, the the windows fogged by salt air, and the energy of the 1930s seemed like a distant dream. Still, the restaurant held on, not because of profits, but because of loyalty. San Franciscans couldn't imagine their city without the Cliff House. It was part of their lives, where their parents had danced, their grandparents had dined, and where their own children now gazed out at the endless ocean. The fall of the Sutro Baths, 1966. If the Cliff House had managed to survive through grit and nostalgia, the Sutro Baths were not as lucky. By the 1960s, the once magnificent complex had become too expensive to maintain. The ocean water that had once filled the pools began to leak through cracked walls. The giant glass roof, once a symbol of innovation, was now rusting and fragile. Fewer people came to swim. Some only visited to explore its echoing halls and dusty exhibits. Developers planned to demolish the Sutro Baths and replace them with modern apartments, a sign of the times. But before that could happen, disaster struck once again. In June 1966, a fire broke out in the old structure. Fueled by wood, tar, and decades of neglect, the flames devoured the building within hours. The heat was so intense that even the steel beams melted and twisted. By morning, all that remained was smoke, charred debris, and pools filled with blackened water. The Sutro Baths, once a symbol of progress and imagination, were gone, leaving only ruins that still rest at the ocean's edge today. For the people of San Francisco, the fire marked the end of an era. The seaside kingdom that Adolph Sutro had built was nearly gone. First the gingerbread palace, now the Sutro Baths. Only one piece of his dream still stood: the Cliff House. The Cliff House alone. After the Sutro Baths fire, the cliffs above Ocean Beach felt emptier than ever. The laughter and music that had once filled the air were replaced by the steady rhythm of wind and waves. The Cliff House stood alone, weathered but still proud. Ownership of the restaurant changed several times. Some owners tried to modernize it, others tried to restore its past glory. One version of the Cliff House even operated as a casual diner, serving hamburgers and milkshakes instead of fine dinners. Locals continued to come, even as the building's paint faded and the ocean winds chipped away at its walls. They came not for luxury, but for nostalgia, to remember a time when San Francisco's edge had been alive with wonder. In a way, the Cliff House had become more than a restaurant. It had become a survivor, a living museum, a place where the past refused to die. Playland's last laugh, 1972. For decades, Playland at the beach had stood beside the Cliff House, a beacon of fun for children and families. But by the early 1970s, its glory days were over. The wooden rides creaked, the games looked outdated, and newer attractions in other parts of California, like Disneyland, made it feel small and old-fashioned. In 1972, Playland finally closed its gates for good. The rides were dismantled, the laughter silenced. Apartment buildings and parking lots soon replaced the colorful carnival that had once stretched along the beach. When Playland disappeared, it felt like the final curtain falling on a century of seaside joy. Only one landmark remained to carry the memory: the Cliff House, standing alone above the waves. A city remembers. Despite the losses, San Franciscans refused to forget. The cliff still drew visitors, artists sketching the ruins of the Sutro Baths, photographers capturing sunsets, and locals bringing their children to see what once was. The Cliff House became a symbol of nostalgia. It was no longer about wealth or fashion, it was about memory. To eat there was to honor the generations who had stood in the same spot, looking out over the same ocean, dreaming the same dreams. 1977, the National Park era, begins. Then, in 1977, everything changed again, this time for the better. That year, the United States government officially purchased the Cliff House and its surrounding lands. It became part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, one of the largest urban park systems in the world. For the first time, the Cliff House belonged to the people, not to private owners, not to wealthy families, but to the nation itself. The National Park Service, NPS, took responsibility for preserving it, ensuring that future generations could walk its halls and see the same breathtaking view that had inspired so many before. Dan and Mary Hontalas, guardians of the edge. To manage the site, the National Park Service partnered with local concessionaires Dan and Mary Hontalas, members of a family with deep roots in San Francisco's fishing community. Their family had operated seafood restaurants along the coast for decades, and they understood what the Cliff House meant to the city. Together with the NPS, they restored the building's dignity. They repainted the walls, repaired the windows, and returned a touch of elegance to the dining rooms. Their goal wasn't to make it fancy, it was to make it timeless again. Under their care, the Cliff House thrived. Tourists and locals returned, couples celebrated anniversaries there, families gathered for birthdays. The sound of glasses clinking and laughter once again filled the air above the waves. A landmark. Preserved. By the end of the 1970s, the Cliff House had survived fires, earthquakes, bankruptcies, and decades of change. And yet, it stood stronger than ever. Now protected by the National Park Service, it had finally become what Adolph Sutro had always wanted, a place for everyone. From its windows, visitors could still see the ruins of the Sutro baths below, a haunting reminder of what time can take away. But above those ruins stood the Cliff House, proof that some dreams can be rebuilt again and again. The restoration, closure, and legacy. 2003, 2020, and beyond. By the dawn of the 21st century, the Cliff House had already lived more lives than most buildings ever could. It had burned to the ground twice, survived an earthquake, seen a war, watched empires of entertainment rise and fall, and even outlasted its own creators. Yet, like San Francisco itself, it never stopped finding ways to begin again. A building, weathered by time. Standing on the cliffs above the Pacific, the Cliff House had always faced the same enemies: salt, wind, and time. The ocean mist carried tiny crystals that slowly ate away at the paint and iron. Every storm left its mark. Every year, the wind seemed to whisper, "Nothing lasts forever." By the early 2000s, the building's once bright white walls had faded to dull gray. Paint peeled along the edges of windows. Inside, carpets were worn, wooden floors creaked, and old pipes groaned. It was clear that if something wasn't done soon, this beloved landmark might finally crumble under the weight of history. But San Francisco wasn't ready to lose its palace on the edge. Not again. The Great Restoration, 2003. In 2003, the National Park Service and the Hontalas family began a massive restoration project to bring the Cliff House back to life. Not as a museum frozen in time, but as a vibrant, living piece of history. Architects, engineers, and historians came together to study old photographs and blueprints. Their mission, to restore the building as closely as possible to its 1909 neoclassical form, the version built by Dr. Emma Merritt, daughter of Adolph Sutro. The work wasn't easy. Years of exposure to the sea had damaged parts of the foundation. The team carefully reinforced the structure without changing its appearance. Every piece of wood, every window frame, and every arch was treated or rebuilt with precision. When the project was done, the Cliff House looked both old and new, elegant, timeless, and proud once again. The restaurant's interiors were refreshed, but still honored its classic feel. Soft lighting, polished wood, and huge glass windows that made the Pacific seem like a moving painting. The renovation also added a 2-story wing with floor-to-ceiling glass walls. From there, visitors could gaze out at the ruins of the Sutro baths, the rocks below, and the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. It was as if the past and present were finally side by side. A city's memory reborn in glass and light. A new golden age. After reopening, the Cliff House entered what many called its modern golden age. It became one of the most popular dining destinations in San Francisco. Locals came for brunches overlooking the waves. Tourists arrived from around the world, eager to see the view they had read about in guidebooks. Weddings were held there. Couples exchanged vows as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ocean gold and pink. Families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. For many, a meal at the Cliff House wasn't just about food, it was about being part of San Francisco's story. In every photo taken inside, there was always that same view behind the smiling faces, the wide blue Pacific. crashing against the ancient rocks below. And beyond the windows, the Sutro Baths ruins rested quietly, half drowned in tide pools, glowing orange at sunset. The two landmarks, one alive, one ghostly, formed a powerful image of the city's soul, beauty, loss, and resilience all at once. All surviving modern storms. The Cliff House had finally found balance again. It had survived fire and disaster. Now it survived decades of change, from bohemian artists in the early 1900s to digital tourists of the 21st century. In the 2010s, social media gave the Cliff House a second kind of life. Photographers, influencers, and travelers shared thousands of pictures of its sunsets. The restaurant became a favorite spot for engagements and anniversaries, a symbol of enduring romance against the restless sea. Every visitor felt that same thrill, to stand on the edge of the continent, the Pacific wind in their hair, and realize they were in the same place where San Franciscans had gathered for over 150 years. It seemed as though the Cliff House would last forever. 2020, the year the world stopped. Then came the year no one saw coming, 2020. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the world, San Francisco, like so many cities, shut down. Streets emptied, businesses closed, and silence replaced the sounds of everyday life. The Cliff House, for the first time in generations, went dark. The dining rooms were empty. The tables were bare. The windows that once reflected candlelight now only reflected the gray fog rolling in from the sea. For months, the restaurant tried to hold on. The Hontales family, who had managed it for decades, hoped that the closures would only be temporary. But as the pandemic stretched on, the losses mounted. Rent, maintenance, and expenses became too heavy to bear. On December 13, 2020, the owners announced that the Cliff House would close permanently. When the news broke, the city grieved. It wasn't just a restaurant shutting down. It was a piece of San Francisco's soul. The final goodbye. In the days that followed, people began to gather outside the locked doors. Some left flowers. Others taped handwritten notes to the windows. Messages of love, memories of family dinners, drawings of the old gingerbread palace that had burned long ago. Elderly couples stood together quietly, staring at the building where they had celebrated anniversaries decades before. Young families told their children stories about how their grandparents used to come here. For many, it felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. When workers climbed onto the roof to remove the Cliff House sign, a small crowd stood below, watching in silence. Cameras rolled, some people cried, others clapped softly, a farewell applause to a landmark that had given the city 157 years of memories. A silent witness. Today, the Cliff House still stands, silent, empty, but unbroken. It no longer serves meals, but its presence remains powerful. The building is now managed by the National Park Service, and visitors can still walk its grounds, peer through the windows, and imagine what once was. The sound of waves crashing below is the same sound that Adolph Sutro once heard. The wind that whips across the cliffs is the same, wind that blew the flames of the fires that destroyed its past forms. Below, the Sutro Baths ruins shimmer in shallow pools of water, their concrete bones covered in seaweed and memory. Together, the two landmarks form a haunting duet. One standing tall, one lying in ruin, both telling the same story. That beauty can be fragile, but history endures. The legacy lives on. The story of the Cliff House isn't just about architecture. It's about people, dreamers, builders, and believers who refuse to let the edge of the world stay silent. It's the story of Adolph Sutro, who turned cliffs and wind into magic. It's the story of his daughter Emma Merritt, who rebuilt her father's dream when all hope seemed lost. It's the story of the Whitney brothers, who filled the coast with laughter and light. And it's the story of the countless visitors, from miners and millionaires to soldiers and families, who stood before the ocean and felt both small and infinite. Even now, though the restaurant doors are locked, the Cliff House continues to inspire. Photographers capture its silhouette against fiery sunsets. Artists paint its outline above the rolling sea. Hikers stop along the trail, leaning on the railing, letting the wind hit their faces. And for a moment, they feel connected to everyone who ever stood there before. the palace on the edge. If you stand there at dusk, when the sun dips low and the fog begins to creep in, you can almost hear echoes of the past. The clinking of glasses, the laughter of guests, the faint notes of a piano playing inside. The waves crash against the rocks, the gulls circle above, and the sea breathes the same rhythm it always has. The cliff house may be silent now, but silence is not the same as absence. It remains a palace on the edge of the Pacific, a monument to endurance, imagination, and the unbreakable spirit of San Francisco. As long as the ocean keeps moving and the wind keeps howling, the story of the cliff house will never truly end.